Hello, everybody. Happy Friday. Norwich City back in action at Carrow Road this Saturday against Birmingham City. And with that, delighted to be joined with my colleague Samuel Seaman to preview this fixture. Of course, 4 defeats in 5 in all competitions, 3 defeats in 4 in the league. It's kind of now or never for Norwich to get back in good form and back in winning ways. Sam, we're going to start with a little bit of reflection on the Fulham Cup tie during the week. Obviously, a heavily rotated squad, so it's difficult to kind of make judgments, but it did feel like there was a step forward from what was a pretty horrid display at Plymouth last weekend that I'm trying to erase quickly out of my memory. That some of the defending on display that day is very hard to forget. Did that performance midweek provide a little bit of encouragement? Obviously, I spoke there about the rotation in the squad, but it does feel like maybe there's certain players there that are sort of pushing on David Wagner's door and knocking on the door and saying, look, I deserve a start on Saturday.
Yeah, I think it was something Norwich needed in a number of ways, really. Not only did they need a good performance to sort of improve that mood after the Plymouth game, I obviously don't think they're all the way there just from a narrow loss in the Cup, but I also think squad rotation-wise and in terms of squad depth, probably a lot of fears were allayed in that sense, and Wagner will probably feel quite relieved by some of the performances that his second string put in, because we were looking at it sort of going into that game, wondering where the solutions were going to come from, because it didn't look like, although they had just lost 6-2 to a promoted side and played really poorly, it didn't look like there was much Wagner could actually change to try and deal with those problems. But now that we've seen those performances from a number of individuals who it didn't feel like were especially close to the starting 11 before the game, I think that now makes the squad feel a lot bigger. It looks like Wagner has a lot more options to try and change things than maybe he did going into that Fulham game. So I think for him and for the narrative, it was really positive. Also, just for Norwich generally and how their season sort of looks going forward, I think it was really positive. And we saw obviously some very good performances from the likes of Jayden Warner. Przemysław Poeta was very impressive, I thought, as was Adam Forshaw. And although some of the players in that 11, even if they played well, do still feel like they might not quite be in the thinking for the 11 yet, it certainly makes that squad feel a lot closer together than some of the positions where we were looking at. I think we saw Kellen Fisher, for example, was somebody who had a really good game against Fulham, in my opinion. But going into the game, it felt like the gap between him and Jack Stacey was absolutely huge. So no matter how poorly Jack Stacey played, and I don't think he has been great in recent weeks, it felt like Wagner didn't really have an option. But then you've got somebody like Kellen Fisher who goes and plays really well at Fulham, and it feels like all of a sudden there is competition. And if Stacey has a poor game, Wagner does have the option to go and rotate. So, yeah, I think it was a positive more for the mid to long term than obviously for the short. They got knocked out. So for the short term, it didn't feel like that much of a positive. But I think for the mid to long term, Norwich really needed that. But they do need to go and deliver against Birmingham. And I think everyone will forget how positive the Fulham performance was very quickly if they go and lose at Carrow Road this weekend. So, yeah, it's an interesting one to follow. But I think hopefully the atmosphere at Carrow Road will be a lot better than it would have been if that Fulham game hadn't happened after the Plymouth loss, obviously.
Yeah, Wagner was sort of quick to mention the fact he'd have to rotate his squad a bit this week. 3 more games in the Championship in quite quick concession. Of course, the Birmingham home game this Saturday, Swansea away and Coventry away, up and coming within the next few days as well. So it's going to be a busy period. A few comments already coming in here on YouTube. Tim Crow, Harvey and Sam. I hope you're well, Tim, this afternoon. I think Warner definitely deserves to start, and Tino on YouTube as well. Plaheta and Sign should be in the starting 11. Jayden Warner was one that Connor asked David Wagner about this morning at the press conference. I'm going to actually just play the clip now so we can hear his thoughts, and then we're going to talk a little bit about the centre-back situation.
And then the other one I wanted to ask you about was Jayden Warner. Obviously, with Danny Bark coming back, Jayden was really impressive on Wednesday night in his senior debut. Is he in your thoughts for tomorrow as well, or is it kind of about managing him a little bit as well after giving him his senior debut?
No, listen, first of all, I totally agree with you that the young lads or the team in general on Wednesday has done a great job. But it is very important that we do everything step by step. It was a first taste. It was a very good first impression. We were not surprised, even if obviously if you don't do it, you don't know it, because we've seen him and the young guys in training, what they are capable of. Kellen as well now with the third competitive game, full 90 minutes again, very impressive. So we have some very interesting boys in the backhand, and they will get their game time in the season for sure. Because we will need everyone. Will this be tomorrow, in the next 2 weeks, 2 months? Nobody knows, but it's good to have them, and they've shown that they are close, and this is very, very.
Yeah, 6 goals conceded last weekend at Plymouth. It could be quite easy for David Wagner to make rotations in that defence, Sam. And Shane Duffy, I thought, was particularly poor against Plymouth, although against Leicester in the game before, I thought he was an absolute colossus at the back with some really important challenges. Ben Gibson's always one that's, I suppose, Marmite player. Some fans really like him, and some fans maybe less so. Danny Bart's there in reserve, not made any minutes yet for the club at senior level, just due to the fact, like during the week he was cup tied, so no opportunity for Wagner to rotate him. But I thought Jayden Warner really showed what he was about on Wednesday night there against Fulham. We've seen minutes of him in the under-21s, but it's really difficult to sort of maybe look where he is in his development till he actually gets thrown into a first team situation. And I thought, on the whole, he was a really impressive performance from him for the full 90. So what's your thoughts going into this one, Sam, in terms of centre-back positions, and would you make any changes going into this game on Saturday?
I think he has to make change. You can't concede 6 goals and not change one of your centre-backs. Unfortunately, the lack of depth, as much as I've said, it's maybe less than it felt like it was at a time, means that probably one of them still has to start. Just from that answer that we saw from Wagner, as much as he was praising that Warner performance on Wednesday, I don't feel he was. It felt a bit more like he was edging towards keeping him in reserve for this weekend. It didn't really sound like he was ready to throw him in at the deep end. But you can't keep the same centre-back duo that lost 6 goals against Plymouth. I think the reason why Ben Gibson started on Wednesday probably gives us an insight into what Wagner's thinking might be for this weekend. I would expect Danny Bart to come into the 11. I think when you sign a player and probably speak to them about the chances that there are to play first team football at the club, if you then go and concede 6 goals and don't give them a chance, then I'm not sure what position that puts you in with that player. So I'd be very surprised if Danny Bart doesn't come into the 11. Of course, unless Wagner wanted 2 under-21s against Fulham, which I don't think, even though obviously the cup wasn't his priority, I don't think he would have wanted to do that. It meant that one of those 2 centre-backs that played against Plymouth would have to be in that duo. And for me, whichever one he played in there was probably the one likely to be rested for Saturday, because if you're thinking of starting Ben Gibson, why give him 90 minutes at Craven Cottage 2 or 3 days before he's going to have to go out and play against Birmingham on Saturday? So for me, if I had to guess, I would say Duffy and Bart. That's what I've gone for with Tactics Board as well. But Warner's definitely added a different dimension to the situation. Obviously, I mentioned him briefly before as a player who played really well against Fulham and looked every bit the sort of first team player, which was interesting for me because you said there about how maybe at under 21s level it's quite hard to judge who's where in their development. I think there are probably people behind the scenes who are better at doing that than we are, but I hadn't been especially impressed with him at sort of youth level. I think when I've watched him alongside other defenders, I've usually been more impressed with the other one, but that probably speaks to the sort of attributes that he has and why they see him so close to the first team group, that he can apply his style of football and his attributes and strengths to a first team environment. I think he also brings very different strengths to what the other 3 do. Obviously, Gibson and Duffy and Bart and Grant Hanley, when he comes back, are all very experienced defenders who offer a certain physical presence. But Warner, for me, has a pace that all of them, bar Hanley, have struggled for. His ability on the ball, for me, is better than all of them. I think Gibson has proven before that he can play those forward passes and he can be a useful asset in building the play up, but he's also quite prone to an error, to dawdling on the ball a little bit and giving it away in dangerous positions. So I think Warner gives them some aspects that they're really lacking, while Bart and Gibson and Duffy, for me, are all sort of like for like. I think he gives them a solution that ironically would have helped them quite a lot against Plymouth. Of course, Wagner, after some pretty decent form going into that game, wasn't going to just lob him in for his first senior game against Plymouth. But I think he can provide a lot of solutions in areas where Norwich need it. And although I don't see him starting tomorrow, I think that could come before long if Norwich's negative form continues in the way it does. But, let's not write off Danny Bart before he comes into the team. You spoke about that Duffy performance against Leicester, and I agree. I think he looked like prime Baresi, to be honest, in that game. So hopefully he can sort of reproduce that form. Danny Bart will back himself to help him out a lot and to be an asset in that position. So maybe we're looking at it as a bit of a flash in the pan in terms of the defensive worries after the Birmingham game. But if they do continue in the same vein that they did at Plymouth, I would think Warner surely isn't too far away after that very, very strong performance against Fulham.
Yeah, Joe on YouTube seeming to follow your trend of thought. My opinion, I dropped Ben Gibson. He makes me nervous at the back. So it sounds like Joe's in the camp, sort of more against starting Gibson there on Saturday. Tino, as we mentioned on YouTube, speaking about Borja Sainz, we saw him make his debut at Fulham, score a goal as well, which was a really positive, I thought, sort of, what was it, 25, 30 minutes he got. And you could see sort of the attacking impetus in his game. And he looked like a real threat on the counter every single time he got the ball and Norwich broke. As David Wagner alluded to again this morning in his press conference, it's about building him up to full fitness. They don't want to, chuck him in. And I suppose the danger there is that, he gets another injury and then another setback. And it's important to get him sort of built up. And there's an under-21s game, isn't there, at Carrow Road on Sunday against West Brom. So he kind of spoke about maybe trying to utilise him across both games. I'd imagine he'll be on the bench again tomorrow afternoon. What did you make of that first sort of, I suppose, little cameo we saw of him on Wednesday night there, Sam, against Fulham? And, what could he maybe bring tomorrow off the bench if Norwich, do need a goal in that stage of the game?
I thought he looked pretty exciting. I think he can probably improve his decision-making. There was one time in particular I felt the pass was definitely on to slide Idah through for what would have been a great chance to equalise. He definitely loves to dribble. We saw that. And he's one of the players that sort of gets you off your seat if you're a fan, of course. Maybe in the Onel Hernandez mould in a slightly different way, but he's certainly your typical sort of small attacking winger. I don't think he fits into the number 10 mould at all. He's definitely one that likes to press, obviously has a lot of energy and wants to head straight for goal. So I can see why David Wagner is the sort of manager that likes him in his system. Of course, that's the sort of signing that I'm sure he had a lot of help with from Stuart Webber and the scouting team. But you can see why, if they're looking for players that fit into a David Wagner system, he's the sort of one that they want. And I think it made absolute sense with what we've seen from him before. I think at Giresunspor, a key play of his was high pressing and winning the ball off defenders high up the pitch. He did that again against Fulham, and getting possession and driving forward was how he created that goal for himself in the first place. Again, probably highlighted the slight rawness in decision making, because even before that goal, he managed to lose the ball on the edge of the box. So I think he probably needs to build up that composure a little bit to absolutely get the potential out of him that there clearly is. But you can understand it. He's had 3 months without football, really. He's at a new club where he's obviously keen to make an impression, and he's been brought on for half an hour. You can understand why he just wants to drive a goal and he just wants to try and create those moments for himself. And I thought he actually finished really, really well. He looked like somebody who's, scored 10 games in a row when he got that chance, rather than somebody who might be a little bit raw. It looked like pure instinct that he finished that chance with. So I think it's definitely one that has given Norwich fans a lot of positivity. I'm actually writing a column at the moment that says not to put too much pressure on him, and I do think that's the case. I've got, frightful visions in my head of Yannick Wildschut and Stephen Naismith and Matthias Norman and all these players that we've sort of cast as the saviours to a season at times. And I don't think all that pressure should be on one man, especially one who's never played in English football before and has just signed and is still adapting to David Wagner's system and to the Championship. But he definitely is somebody who can add something. I think he's got more quality than a lot of the wingers in Norwich's setup. He clearly is a player who is talented and can offer something for Norwich. And I think it's a really exciting time. What about you? When would you sort of throw him in? I do think, although Wagner said he would be in the squad, it's definitely, for me, not going to be in a starting position. But how soon before you'd probably throw him in?
Yeah, I think given, we've got this international break coming up, and the fact they've already got sort of lots of options in the wide areas. Plaheta, I thought, was another player who performed really, really well on Wednesday night. And it feels like, based on the comments that David Wagner made today in the press conference, he's a player that's, you know, knocking on the door for a start. And they obviously got the likes of Ono Hernandez back to full fitness, and Fashnak and Rowe both need to kind of get back to the form they were in the early start of the campaign. But they've got options there, so I don't think there's a sort of tendency that they have to go and throw him in early doors. You can always build him up and give him that time that he maybe needs to get up to full speed. I think it will just be a case of cameos off the bench this week, and then maybe come round to that Leeds game in a few weeks' time. He is almost an unknown quantity at that point, and he could be a player against a Leeds system and a Daniel Farke team that we all know very well could actually suit, you know, playing against that. So I think that might be the one I'd earmark for him for a start, but of course time will tell. And we're not David Wagner, so we can't make those decisions, but we'll see. But talking on the theme of finishing before we talk Birmingham, Adam Idah, 2 goals last weekend, one a penalty, one a quite a good finish, actually. I know Norwich almost had freedom at that point. They were 5-0 down to kind of not have to worry so much about, sort of, I suppose, defending at that point. They were already sort of done the damage. But I thought Adam Idah actually was the one player who could maybe come out of that game with a little bit of credit, especially in that second half. You know, we could see him making those runs, and Sarah seemed to connect with him quite well. So I'd imagine that's potentially a route that David Wagner could take tomorrow. How important was those 2 goals for his confidence, Sam? Because we've spoken about him very regularly on these preview shows, podcasts, whatever format it's been over the course of this season. And maybe that sort of element of confidence in his game is so important. If he gets that early chance, that early goal, how crucial it is for his sort of, I suppose, the rest of the game, the rest of the 90 minutes. So how important is it for him tomorrow? Early start, early goal, hopefully, for, you know, moving forwards, just for tomorrow, but also in the next 3 games that are coming up this week.
Yeah, I think you could see that confidence at Craven Cottage, to be honest. When he came on, obviously he won't have been disheartened by the fact that he didn't start because Wagner made so many changes. But when he replaced, can't remember who it was he replaced now, but he obviously came on alongside Hwang, but he had that air in him of somebody who knew that he was the man and felt like he was coming on to do the job and to save the team almost. And that's not an attitude I've seen from him much in a Norwich shirt. I think at times he's looked quite nervous and quite in his shell, and probably quite wary of the fact that fans were getting a little bit tired of his lack of form. Of course, those 2 goals will make a very big difference for him. And although we've applied all the context to the fact that he obviously scored those 2 goals when Plymouth were 5-0 up, and I think at that point Ballymumba was doing Cruyff turns for cheers from the crowd, you know, it's still 2 goals against the Championship side. It's still 2 that will prop up his record for the season. I think that actually took him, and this feels slightly unbelievable, but that took him over his threshold for senior goals in a season for his career. So he's already sort of broken that target. I don't know if it was a target for him, but he's already made that milestone, and make no doubt about it, that's something that strikers are looking at, and numbers is something they're definitely bothered by. So I think he'll be very happy with that. And you could see that confidence in him at Fulham. And I don't know if this was just in the context of quite a poor Hwang performance, but I felt myself actually having a little bit more trust in Adam Idah when he came onto the pitch against Fulham. When Norwich attacked and they were looking for that equaliser, I felt much more that Idah was likely to pop up with that goal than anyone else, to be honest. And that's probably the first time I've felt that with Adam Idah for a long time. So as much talk as there has been, it sort of got brushed under the carpet that before the Plymouth game, we were going on about this being Idah's big chance. And I think Connor wrote a column about it, and lots of fans would have been talking about him before the game. You know, when I was speaking to them outside the home park away end before the game, without me even asking the question, I think most of them brought up the fact that it was a big chance for Idah. And then just because the defence was poor mainly, and I'm not saying he had his best game in that first half, but because the defence collapsed, basically, everyone forgets about the fact that actually he has taken that big chance that we were talking about. He's done as much as he can do, and if you score 2 goals at this level, Norwich should be expecting to win the game. So theoretically, and I know it is a little bit more nuanced, but just to put it in quite basic terms, theoretically, if you're a striker and you score 2 goals, nobody can say that you haven't done your job. So I was very pleased for him with those Plymouth goals. Obviously, we've spoken about how much of a confidence player he is, and hopefully he goes out at Carrow Road and has the full support of the crowd behind him, doesn't have that anxiety that I think we've seen in his play at times. And if so, I think he can go on and be a really good player. He hasn't done it consistently enough, and let's let's highlight that he's not really had more than 3 or 4 good games for Norwich in a row. So he does need to now go and prove it. And we can't just rest on our laurels and say that Adam Idah's hit his stride because of those 2 goals. But it was definitely a big performance for him and a big moment for him to get those 2 goals. And I think he can now hopefully kick on. But we haven't seen that yet. So again, a lot to prove for him still. But I think he'll go into that game feeling a lot more confident.
Yeah, it feels like another good opportunity. Birmingham kind of, I suppose, a little bit vulnerable after their recent results. They haven't won a game in the last 4 as well. They've kind of had a little bit of a similar start to the campaign to Norwich, where the first 4 games they were absolutely flying. They've had a few injuries. I think the likes of Ethan Laird has been out. Tyler Roberts has been out. I think they lost Buchanan this week as well to injury, who seems to have started really well. So they're a team that's maybe lacking confidence as well. So I think there's a good opportunity there for him to capitalise on that. Just your thoughts so far on Birmingham, Sam? I know you watched John Eustace press conference this morning to write up an article. So what are your takes on them and what sort of challenge do you think they'll pose tomorrow for Norwich?
I think they've actually got a really, really good team. I think they're struggling big time with injuries at the moment, which maybe has gone slightly under the radar. But when I was watching that press conference, as he said, it was just Eustace reeling off, this player's out for 6 weeks, this player's out for 6 weeks, this player's out for 6 weeks. And yet, when I looked at their starting 11 for their last game, it was still a pretty strong one. Lee Buchanan, for example, is somebody who's out injured, but I think is a really, really good signing and is somebody who will help them out long term. Cody Drame is somebody who was very highly rated at Leeds, but probably doesn't suit Daniel Farke's requirements. And then they've got up front, they've got Jay Stansfield, who's been absolutely flying so far this season. Bielik in midfield is somebody who's impressed consistently at Championship level as well, and Bakuna. So I think they've actually got strength throughout their squad and probably under the radar a little bit. This is the best team they've had in a long, long while. So as much as Birmingham are a side that teams are now probably quite used to seeing in the Championship and maybe even in and around the relegation battle, I think I heard on Terrace Talk that they're the longest standing Championship team, right? So they feel a little bit like also-rans and the sort of team that is going to go under the radar. But for me, the more research I've done into that team, the more confident I'd feel on their behalf. But this does feel like a good time to strike. They are losing a bit of that momentum that they had at the start of the season. Obviously, they've got all those injuries that I mentioned, and they don't have a great record at Carrow Road, if that's the sort of thing that means something to you. But for me, it feels like the sort of game that Norwich needed. It's 2 sides that are in a bit of negative momentum at the moment and not in a great moment. So you look at it, quite often in these games when Norwich are doing poorly, you feel like because momentum is so important in the Championship, it's just going to go with a side that are building confidence. But with these 2, somebody has to get out of the rut today. Either they both take a point or somebody has to get out of this negative moment that they're in. So I think Norwich have a good chance of beating them. Every time I come on the preview show, I say that it's probably harder than you're expecting because the Championship, you just never know what sort of curveballs it's going to throw. I think I predicted a 2-1 win for Norwich against Plymouth, and that felt almost conservative at the time, and then they go and lose 6-2. So every game has the potential to completely surprise you. But Birmingham are no mugs. You know, you can't really say that having looked at their 11, they aren't going to provide a threat for Norwich. So it's definitely one they have to be wary of. But as I said, because of that momentum, I'm such a big believer in how important that is in the Championship. Because they're facing a team that doesn't really have any of that, I think they have a better chance than they will against the likes of Plymouth and a lot of the teams that they've faced so far this season, because that confidence is so important. And when it's not a factor with the squad that Norwich have, they probably should be looking at themselves as favourites, in my view.
Yeah, you speak about that record. I think Birmingham's last victory at Carrow Road 2002. They're sort of one of the, I suppose Norwich are a bogey team for them. I think Norwich are unbeaten in the last 10 between the 2 sides as well. Birmingham's last victory over Norwich was a 3-0 at St Andrews in 2016. So these things are there to be broken, but the stats, if you're sort of that way inclined, do favour Norwich. We're now just going to get some thoughts on the game before we delve into a few more of the comments down in the comment section below. how do you feel this one's going to go, Sam? Because it's one of them where Norwich's home form generally this season's been pretty good. You take that Leicester game out of the equation, which Leicester are probably going to go on and win the title. So I don't necessarily think you can draw too many conclusions. And actually, Norwich in the second half gave them a good go and probably could have got something from the game. So how important is the Carrow Road factor tomorrow and getting back to winning ways and getting those fans back on side after what was a pretty miserable last couple of games, really?
Yeah, well, I think this is why their early season form at home has been such a positive. I think I said after that Stoke game, they almost need something when things are going poorly to drag them back into the centre, and that's what home form is for a lot of teams who enjoy those games. Last season, when they were struggling at Carrow Road so much, it wasn't like they could look at the fixture list and say, "Oh, it's all right, we're back at Carrow Road before long. That'll be some respite." It was almost the opposite. And this season, I feel like it's an opportunity when things are going poorly to look at it as a positive that they're at Carrow Road. And I think it definitely is. The fans who travelled will obviously be feeling very negative. But, if you really break down the numbers, it's probably about, 1 in 20 of those supporters that will be at Carrow Road was actually at Plymouth and will be going to the away games regularly. So I think there will still be some goodwill from the home support, and hopefully they're still feeling the positive momentum that they did early on in the season. And I think that can really drive Norwich on. It's definitely a place that when things are going well can make a difference. It's the stands are close to the pitch. It feels very idiosyncratic in a lot of ways, that stadium, and I think Norwich can thrive on that really. So yeah, it's a big factor for sure. But I'm not sure what the expectation will be. I don't know if it'll be a demand to win. I almost feel like just with how the momentum's going, I would probably take a draw just to arrest that falling momentum. But I'm not sure what the mood is really like. I suppose I'll find out when I'm speaking to fans before the game tomorrow. But I don't know. I don't know if I'm alone or if that's a fairly common view. How do you feel about it? Would you take a point from a Norwich perspective?
I think it's probably important they do go and get 3 points. I mean, the next week does feel quite big. You look at the 3 games on paper. I mean, Birmingham are kind of in a little bit of a bad spell of form. Swansea have really struggled at the start of the campaign. There's a few question marks around Michael Duff as well, I think, and sort of what he's doing down there. Coventry as well, maybe not started in the fashion I thought they would. I thought they'd be a sort of side who'd be up amongst the playoff mix. And it feels like a big opportunity to try and get sort of maybe maximum points or at least sort of 6 to 7 points to really get the season back on track. But anything sort of less than that, and it suddenly becomes maybe a few more question marks, particularly given, there's teams that are in and around Norwich that are maybe starting to find their feet again. And given the way that the end of last season transpired, and I think that's still in memory for most Norwich fans, David Wagner was quite quick to kind of, I suppose, pull Connor up on it the other week and saying, let's forget last season. But I think it's quite difficult to do that when you maybe see some parallels in recent games to what we saw at spells last season, despite kind of the overturn in terms of the transfers during the summer. So it feels like a big week, I think, for Norwich, especially when you've then got that 2-week break to then kind of sort of just mull over the previous results. Especially this is the last Carrow game before that break as well. So I think it's important they get the win, because that's where the most fans will see the game and see the results, as you alluded to there in your previous answer. With that, we'll go into the comments. Dom saying, "Did I hear Duffy be compared to Brazy?" Yes, you did hear that right, Dom. Ollie, liking your haircut there, Sam.
He's a great guy, fair play.
And Nicky asking the question that I was going to come round to. He's gone for a 2-0 Norwich, Idah and Signs on the score sheet. Are you feeling that positive as well, Sam? Let's have your score prediction.
Oh, well, I've just said that I'll take a point, so I feel like I'm going back to being negative. I'm getting quite a lot of stick this year for being slightly more negative, but I think I would take a point, to be honest. And I think Birmingham are actually a good side. They're 10th in the Championship at the moment, having not won in their last 4. So that tells you how strong their start to the season was. And it also tells me, I think, that they could even be in and around that playoff mix. From watching Terrace Talk, which I definitely recommend, it feels like there is a bit of a cautious positivity about Birmingham and a little bit of optimism around that club at the moment. So yeah, I think I'm sorry for those that want me to be more positive, but I think I'm going to go 1-1, and I do think Idah's gonna score. If I have to go for a goal scorer, I'll say that Idah's going to score, because I do feel quite positive about him at the moment. But you said it's a must-win, so I'm assuming you're going to go for a winning prediction.
Yeah, I think it's one of them games that's going to be quite tight and competitive, is what David Wagner expects from the game as well. I think I said 2-1 on Terrace Talk, Norwich win, just to get back to winning ways. Although I think there's a little bit of apprehension maybe in that these previous games are still in my mind, and I'm hoping that Norwich can sort of put it right. I know Birmingham fans are still feeling relatively confident. I was on a Birmingham show last night. Their fans are feeling relatively optimistic still, despite kind of the little bit of negative downturn. And Gab Sutton, I spoke to on Terrace Talk, he went for a 3-1 Birmingham win. So I think, there's kind of mixed feelings amongst both sets of fans for this one. So we'll see what we get tomorrow at Carrow Road. And with that, we're going to round off the show. Thanks for joining us this Friday lunchtime. Lots of great content across our channels at the moment. If you head over to YouTube, you can listen to Terrace Talk. You can hear Gav Sutton's excellent thoughts on Birmingham. Sam provides some tactical analysis and some predicted 11 feelings ahead of this one on the latest tactics board. David Wagner's full press conference is now up on our YouTube channel. Me and Connor were down at Colney this morning speaking to him ahead of this one. I think he seems in a relatively high spirits and feels that Norwich can get back to winning ways, so that's well worth listening to. Lots of great articles on our Pinken app as well. You've got Chris Sutton's latest column, Ewan Roberts' latest column, $1.99 for the first 2 months, $2.99 thereafter, or $29.99 for an annual subscription. So go and head over there and check all the good stuff out on our app. With that, we're going to sign off. We'll see you at Carrow Road tomorrow. If you're heading down to Carrow Road tomorrow, bring the noise and hopefully you'll be rewarded with 3 points. And if you're not, enjoy the rest of your weekend. And it's another busy week up and coming for Norwich, so fingers crossed they can get it off to a very positive start.